apologize for that audio difficulty. Brian Fallon is still with us, press secretary for the Clinton campaign. Brian, sorry about that. The tin cans and string are set up now, and we can hear you. You were finishing your thought about why she hasn't sat down with this IG. This Inspector General for the State Department, by the way, Steve Linick, was appointed by President Obama in 2013. I heard you on another channel earlier today suggest that there is some kind of anti-Clinton bias with this Inspector General, an Inspector General appointed by President Obama?
Well, there were reports a few months back suggesting, affirming the fact that one of the top individuals in that office, the #2 official in that office, had a connection, had formerly worked for Senator Grassley, who, of course, has been one of Secretary Clinton's chief antagonists on this issue. And so there were calls from various members of Congress for that official to at least recuse herself from this matter. That didn't happen.
Well, you're not suggesting this report is somehow flawed because of that tenuous connection on the #2 person in that?
Well, I think one can raise questions about whether someone should have recused himself and still assess the report on its merits. And I think that many of the findings in this report actually corroborate what Secretary Clinton has long said. And in terms of the actual recommendations that this report makes in terms of how the State Department could improve its record-keeping systems, we've said today that if Secretary Clinton were still in charge of the State Department, she'd be accepting those recommendations.
You know, she's said numerous times, Brian, that she has turned everything over, every single thing. The State Department said today that's not the case. The report itself said there were things that were not turned over right away. And in fact, one of the emails that did not come out publicly in the tranches that were given to reporters was one that said, in November 2010, Secretary Clinton and her Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations discussed the fact that Secretary Clinton's emails to department employees were not being received. The Deputy Chief of Staff emailed the Secretary that, quote, "We should talk about putting you on state email or releasing your email address to the department so you're not going to spam." In response, the Secretary wrote, "Let's get separate address or device, but I don't want any risk of the personal being accessible." That was never released to reporters.
Right, so from time to time there have been reports over the last few months of instances where materials that she turned over didn't match materials that other folks that worked in the State Department turned over. There were an incidental amount of emails that didn't appear in both batches. There have been known instances, for instance, the first 2 months where she started off as Secretary of State, where she was not yet on the server. And so when she went to retrieve the emails to provide them to the State Department last year, they weren't on the server in the first place, so she couldn't turn them over. She has turned over, what she has always said is she's turned over everything that she had, which constituted 55,000 pages, which is 55,000 pages more than anyone else, including other secretaries that use personal email, ever turned over to the State Department.
Yeah, no other secretary had a personal server. We should make that clear, as we've made it clear on the first part. But here's the question.
From a record-keeping perspective, though, Brett, that question is beside the point. You can retain the records whether your email system is on a server or through Gmail.
Well, sure, but you're also dealing with 2,100 classified emails that you all say were classified after the fact. I mean, they weren't marked. It really doesn't matter. Right. The issue is the server. It was on the server. So handling classified material is another investigation, but one in which we'll see what happens with the FBI.
Well, but there too, the same issue applies with Secretary Powell, where emails that he sent on his personal account have been judged after the fact, retroactively, to contain information that they think was sensitive. Secretary Powell reacted quite forcefully to that and suggested it was absurd in terms of the type of material that they were considering now classified. And so I'm not suggesting and invoking Secretary Powell that he did anything wrong back at the time when he was using personal email. But I think the fact that it's so widely applicable, this criticism that's been made of Secretary Clinton, it shows that it's really just a matter of different agencies, in this case intelligence agencies, taking one standard when the State Department is very customized to using another.
Obviously, a lot of people on Capitol Hill look at that differently. Brian, we really appreciate your time tonight.